We're joined today by Keith Coughlan, Executive Chairman of European Metals. Keith, thanks for your time.
Thank you, David.
Looking at the DFS, you announced in late 2023 it would be delayed into this current quarter. What were some of the reasons behind the delay, and how confident are you that this new deadline will be met?
Well, it was primarily with regards to lining up all of the financial inputs, the supply agreements, the quotes and that sort of thing, to be able to cost the DFS. Everything else has basically been done and done well with a high degree of confidence. But we want that same level of confidence, for all aspects of it, and it just became too difficult for the project team to complete that part of it on time. So they've asked for an extension into the end of this quarter. We've been existing in a high inflationary environment, particularly in Europe, and just getting those costings right and getting the level of confidence we want in them has been problematic. It's not an easy task. We are pricing some very complex and expensive equipment.
And with that slight slippage in the DFS timing, does it play into the timeline of the project generally?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't affect the time to production. The critical path element of the timing is the permitting. The permitting process keeps running, but it's not dependent on the completion of the DFS. Having said that, obviously we want to complete the DFS as quickly as possible because then it leads on to other things. But the project timelines are determined primarily by the permitting regime.
And what about offtake? Does the slippage in DFS pause offtake discussions, or do they keep going? And probably expanding on that, how are offtake discussions going?
It has no impact on offtake discussions. We're talking about long-term agreements. Most of the agreements that we're talking about are either 5 plus 5 years or 4 plus 4 years, something along those lines. So it takes you, well into the future. And in terms of your start date for supplying into those offtake agreements, as I said, that's primarily determined by the permitting regime. So, offtake is still a very, very live discussion. And I think in Europe it's mirrored by what's happening from a macro point of view with regards to battery metals, what's happening at an EU level, at the critical raw materials level, and that tends to bring the off-takers, to the table. They see it as an overall solution to providing lithium supply in Europe for European use.
And just touching on the lithium market, clearly the price has come off substantially in the latter stages of last year and into this year. Do you think that impacts the ability for this project to get up, but also the off-take discussions to conclude?
So, people quote the spot price. I mean, the lithium pricing market it's complicated, and it can be quite misleading. But the price you see quoted around $14,000 a tonne today for battery-grade lithium carbonate is a spot price, and it doesn't truly reflect long-term, high volume contracts, the sorts of things that we're talking about, and those contracts are still at prices much higher than current spot. If you look at even the most pessimistic number that I've seen in the last few weeks, and we are at a pessimistic stage, but even the most pessimistic number for long-term incentive pricing is in the low 20,000s. And I've seen, Benchmark, for example, who we generally use, are around 27, 28,000. This is US dollars a tonne for battery-grade lithium carbonate. I heard Daniel Jimenez interviewed last week saying that he can't see it out of the question that we could see that price go into the mid-30s this calendar year. So whilst the spot price impacts on the market sentiment, it impacts on the share price, obviously, of all lithium stocks. It's not the number that we have in mind when we're talking with off-takers. And nearly all of our off-take discussions currently carry elements of floor price and ceiling price. The off-takers, the customers, are as concerned about seeing the lithium price go back to 80,000, where it was, as we are seeing the long-term lithium price go lower. And they want protection on that upside, and they're prepared to give protection on the downside. And that's really the key number. The key number will be what floor price you can get into these off-take agreements. Yes, you might give away a little on the upside, but you don't have to hedge your entire production. And from our point of view, We don't have to hedge our phase 2 production, but the job is to get the project built, get it funded and get it built. And in order to get it funded, you need the security of a long-term offtake agreement with a tier 1 offtaker, and preferably with a floor price in it.
We're seeing increases in OPEX and CAPEX numbers for a large number of lithium projects coming on stream. Do you see the same happening with your project? Do you see significant increases in CAPEX and OPEX based on the PFS numbers?
Well, based on the PFS, absolutely. You know, the PFS update is over 2 years old. So the numbers that went into that are, 2 to 2.5 years old minimum. And clearly we've been in a high inflationary environment for most of those 2 or 2.5 years, particularly in Europe. Particularly the energy-led inflation that we've seen, due to the Ukraine situation. So the numbers will definitely be higher than the PFS. I think everyone expects that, not just from our project, but from other studies that we've seen announced. Correspondingly, we would be using a higher lithium price in that financial model, higher than the 17,000 that we used 2.5 years ago. That's probably dampened a little by the current lithium price, but it's not. It's more about the relative costs relative to the market. Everyone's costs have risen, and that's not just for fully integrated projects like us. From the point of view of the spodumene con producers, so their costs have risen, but also the converter that they're selling their concentrate to, the costs have risen as well, and we see those prices going higher. But long-term incentive prices in the kind of mid to high 20,000 a tonne, makes sense, and that's the number that we're looking at. And I think you arrive at that number by looking at the swing production. So when we saw the lithium prices go significantly higher last year and slightly before that, it brings in DSO production. It brings in the Chinese lepidolites, these sorts of African spodumene, the projects that are at the higher end of the cost curve. And certainly none of those projects anywhere near make money at today's spot price, and probably not even into the low to mid 20s. So when you look at Benchmark's number, 27, 28,000, it makes sense given what you know about the cost profile of those sorts of projects.
What about at the macro level in the EU, the Czech Republic itself? What are you seeing, and what positives are coming your way from a macro point of view?
From a macro European Union perspective, we've seen for some time now talk of new legislation, talk of new rules and regulations being brought in, and it is a slow process. However, in the new year, we've already seen some advancement there. We've seen the EU announce the concept of the formal strategic project designation under the Critical Raw Materials Act. And we believe there'll be a call, like an expression of interest for that first quarter of this year, which clearly we will submit. We've had some of our key in-country execs in Brussels over the last 2 weeks talking about that and putting our case forward. Cinovec already has strategic project designation under the Just Transition Fund, and we believe that will translate into the same designation under the CRMA. So what that does, it opens the project up to potentially a new pool of grants and funding, which is always handy, and it puts a very definitive timeline on permitting and how long a project can take. So it helps with your funding, it helps with your timelines, which are the two key factors. Apart from that, we've seen the announcement from the German government just over the weekend of the establishment of a €1 billion fund to help secure critical raw materials for German OEMs. And our project basically sits on the German border, and it's very likely that our key off-takers will be German companies. So, there's potentially some benefit from that. And that's on the back of announcements of other funds of this nature. The French government announced a €2 billion fund, of which they've cornerstoned the first €500 million. That was late last year. So there is that groundswell which lines up with what is coming out of Brussels. From a Czech point of view, some new legislation came into effect on the 1st of January with regards to the construction code. and again, speeding up the permitting process for critical projects, of which this is clearly one, centralising that permitting process just in Prague, so you don't have to go through a local permitting process, a regional permitting process, and then a federal process, just one. So clearly that helps to streamline and speed things up. So whilst the adoption of these sorts of policies and legislation in Europe is slow, you can see the momentum building with all of those different factors pointing into it, which I think is only good news for us.
Speaking of good news, DFS planned for the end of this current quarter. What else do investors have to look forward to from European Metals?
We'll complete all of the test work on the lithium hydroxide prior to that. The work we've done to date and all the announcements we've made relative to the DFS have been with regards to lithium carbonate. So we'll be making those announcements, further announcements along the lines of permitting, rezoning, those sorts of project-specific issues, the DFS itself that you mentioned, and then some of these more macro things, and partnership offtake.
Partnership offtake. We've spoken about it at length over a long period of time. How confident are you that this particular agreement will drop in the near future?
Look, it's a juggle because of the macro factors in it. But as I've always said, we do want a partnership agreement. This is not a customer sort of arrangement, and the other parties want this as well. So this is a long-term partnership with exactly the right sort of people who we want to be selling our product to. Other factors come into that conversation, third-party factors like funding, EU grants, and this sort of thing. But it's the key factor for us now to bring it to fruition, as we reach the end of the DFS, and like I say, it is something I'm giving full attention to.
As Executive Chairman and a substantial shareholder in the company, a long-term believer in the project, do you get annoyed sometimes that the project fundamentals are being outweighed by the lithium price or the share price or any of those other elements?
Well, yeah, look, it's definitely frustrating at times. We remain committed to the project. We remain committed and believers in lithium. In electric vehicle uptake, 22% this year. So the demand for lithium is not going away, and this current volatility is a blip. The long-term security of supply is very important, particularly in Europe. We have a very good project with very strong EU support, very strong Czech government support, very strong ESG credentials, located in a perfect position to supply into what is a continuing, quickly growing market within Europe. We have to tick a few boxes to get it there, but very confident that we will get there.
On that note, exciting times ahead, some key milestones to be hit, still a world-class project that everyone's looking at. Keith, we follow with interest. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me.